Mossdale. For people who know, the mere mention of the word was enough to make them shudder with horror and order another pint. It raised visions of endless jagged crawls, icy canals, and froth-coated sumps. Half the time the entrance was underwater, the other half was blocked. It was the most arduous cave in Britain, demanding almost superhuman endurance, while the water rose 700 feet below, making it potentially the deepest cave in Britain. Mossdale Caverns is a cave system in the Yorkshire Dales, England. Mossdale Beck flows south, parallel to Wharfdale for approximately 4 miles before sinking at Mossdale Scar as probably the largest high-level sink in Yorkshire. The cave system stretches over 6.5 miles long and has a water flow rate of 100 liters per second. The valley is wild, grim, and dark. The Scar is an inset of elephant grey limestone on the slopes of Black Edge. Well over 100 feet long and up to 50 feet high, the rock is shattered by frost and flood, and every winter sees a new section of the face peel away to litter the Scar foot with sharp-edged blocks. The site of the sink changes from year to year, and in times of flood, a broad torrent roars underground the whole length of the Scar. Exploration of Mossdale Caverns was begun in 1941 by Bob Leakey of the British Speleological Association. It is a very flood-prone, challenging cave system, with many of its passages involving long wet crawls. Other sections have neck-deep water, and many of Leakey's explorations were conducted solo as few of his contemporaries had the necessary endurance. The end was finally reached again in 1964 by Mike Boone and Pete Livesey. A return trip to the far end takes between 8 and 10 hours. However, much of the cave system was still to be discovered, so a team was formed to map new territories of the cave system. Throughout the years, many explorations were conducted to map out the entirety of the cave, but the explorers faced many obstacles where they lost themselves twice in 1953 and 1960 respectively, in the cave, and had to be rescued by their mates from difficult situations. These cave mappers then formed their group to carry out rescue operations. Having completed 2 successful rescues from Mossdale Caverns, the team must have felt confident in tackling any future incidents occurring in the cave. However, 7 years were to pass before the team was to face their greatest challenge in Mossdale Caverns. By now the explorers have well knowledge of the cave. Their next aim was to attack those few places, of which they then knew, where a real extension of the system could be expected. The survey had shown over 5.5 miles of passages, enough to place the system in the top ranks of British caves, and yet it was clear that this was but a beginning. Above all, what was the course of the main stream beyond the sump in Siphon Passage? What was the origin of the intense drought felt in far western passages? Of what high-level series were the high-level mud caverns a fragment? What lay beyond the terminal choke of the stream end cavern? It was the promise of these challenging questions which motivated the Party of 6 on June 24, 1967. A party of 10 cavers entered the system at about 2 p.m. on Saturday, June 24. There had been some rain over the Grassington area in the previous few days, but the moors appeared dry and the quantity of water entering the cave was well below normal. The weather forecast for the north had been noted as, quote, bright periods, chances of thundery showers, end quote. After entering the cave, the party at once split, 6 men going on in front with the intention of examining the extremities of the high-level mud caverns or probing further for a way through the stream end cavern. These 6 men, well equipped and very experienced, were Dave Adamson, Jeff Burrow, Bill Frakes, John Ogden, Michael Ryan, and Colin Vickers. The remaining 4 cavers, James Cunningham, Morag Forbes, Colette Lord, and John Shepard, made a sightseeing trip as far as Rough Chamber and returned to the surface, which they reached at about 5:00 that evening. It was now raining lightly, the sky was overcast, but the conditions did not appear to give any cause for alarm. The 4 cavers returned to their base at How Gilnick shooting hut, where they changed and made a meal. The rain continued to fall lightly, and at about 7:30 p.m., Morag returned to the Scar, and finding little apparent difference in the water conditions, she made her way back to the shooting hut, some half-hour's walk over the moor. Shortly after this the rain began to fall heavily, and being now concerned for the safety of the underground party, she again went to the Scar, arriving there at about 9 p.m. Mossdale Beck had now risen to flood proportions, an extensive lake having formed in front of the Scar. The entrance was already underwater. Realizing the grave situation, she ran to Gill House Farm, some 3/4 of a mile, for help, but found it deserted, and went on to Yarnberry, a further 1.5 miles, where she contacted a Mr. Riley, who drove her down to call out the rescue organizations. The advance party of the Upper Wharfdale rescue team with fire brigade personnel and pumps arrived at the scar some 4 hours later. The initial alarm was raised. On Sunday, June 25, they found the conditions very serious with the entrance under some 4 feet of water. A small dam was constructed around the constricted entrance which enabled the rescuers to reach the assembly hall, but they found the normally limited air space beyond Blackpool Sands, which provided the only way into the cave completely submerged and impassable. The use of diving equipment at this stage would have been both futile and dangerous, and therefore further progress was out of the question until the water level could be sufficiently reduced. During this time, the fire brigade had installed a number of portable pumps on the side of the beck, which were sending a stream of water past the scar and on down to the sinks on Keystone Moor. By 3:30 morning, some 8 to 12 of these pumps were operating, but it was clear that this effort was having a negligible effect on the water levels despite the rain had stopped shortly after midnight. 2 hours later, it had been decided that the only possible solution was to obtain the use of heavy digging equipment and divert the whole of Mossdale Beck down past the scar. To do this required a trench some 130 yards long by 6 to 8 feet deep, together with a substantial dam to divert the beck from the sinks at the foot of the scar. By about 8 at morning, the level of the beck appeared to have fallen. It was now found that it was possible to pass the previously submerged sections of the cave and to penetrate as far as Rough Chamber. It was hoped that the missing party might have been trapped in this rather loftier section of the system and have been able to survive the flood in one of the Avons or in Boulder Hall itself. However, no sign of the party was found, and at Rough Chamber, rather a strong stream was still flowing onward down the normally dry, rough passage. It was then felt that it would not be reasonable to proceed further through the restricted passages until the water flow could be reduced and the dam, which was then under construction, was operational. At this time, it became clear to the rescuers who knew the cave that the chances of survival of the missing men were slim. The signs in the cave were of a very extreme flood, and there were only a very limited number of places beyond Rough Chamber in which a party might be safe, and of these they were uncertain. At last, the water diversion and dam were functional and thought to be sufficient to protect underground parties from further flooding. A party of 6 was sent in to search the Marathon Passage. This team was supported by a further party of 6 who entered the cave after few hours. On Sunday, 25 June, it was reported that the first search party had found 5 bodies in the far part of Far Marathon West Passage, a short distance upstream of the junction with the Far Marathon East, which carries a small stream. Until this time, all of the official statements had reported that there were 5 men in the missing party, 5 names had been given and 5 bodies had now been found. The shock which had fallen on all of them was now broken by a report that there were in fact 6 men in the party. Some while was taken to establish this fact with certainty and to determine the names of all 6 men. By this time, the effort which had been expended had depleted the ranks of the rescue party. It was decided that, in view of the extremely remote chance of the 6th man having survived, further efforts to locate him and to identify the bodies would be postponed until Monday. Monday saw heavy rainfall and a dangerous rise in water level behind the dam, so on Tuesday, June 27, a further effort to reinforce the dam throughout the morning is conducted, producing a structure which was about 6 feet high. There was now no thought of the operation being one of rescue, but rather one to determine the fate of the 6th man, to establish the identity of the bodies that had been found, to do what can be done to either bring them out or to bury them as well as underground within the cavern. Once again, every effort was made to provide the parties working underground with the maximum security which could be achieved. This time, Dave and Alan Brooke and Dave Howitt, who have very extensive knowledge of the cave, were then dispatched to make a detailed search of the extremities of the Marathon series. An attempt was made to locate the body of the 6th man who, it was thought, may have been swept further into the cave by the high-pressure waters, but in spite of an intensive search of the far parts of the cave, no body was found. Identification of the 5 bodies had been made, but John Ogden had not been found. The party of 3 arrived at the surface bringing with them a number of items for identification, amongst which was a piece of wet suiting which was subsequently identified as having come from Ogden's suit. Meanwhile, another party surfaced and reported that they had failed to find any sign of Ogden, and also that they considered the task of retrieving the remaining bodies unreasonable, in view of the labor and risk to personnel it would involve. A third search party led by Brian Boardman made the last final effort with instructions to search a number of minor side passages opening off the near and far Marathon passages. On Wednesday morning, it was reported that, whilst making an examination of the area in which 3 of the bodies had been found, he had located what he believed to be the body of John Ogden, jammed vertically in an extremely tight rift only some 15 feet from the other 3, but so covered with silt that only the boots, socks, laces and a part of a white helmet were visible. He had been unable to get a closer view, but the details which he was able to give agreed with the clothing Ogden was known to be wearing. Thus, in part by a process of elimination, John Ogden too was found drowned. The tragedy was complete. 6 of the friends, all from the cave exploring community, 6 most experienced cavers, had all died together, suddenly, and in terrifying circumstances. It was always feared the consequences of a severe flood in Mossdale, yet was never have been believed by the team that they would live to see the day, nor have believed the enormity of the truth. The decision was now made with the agreement of the families of the deceased. The bodies were buried by their colleagues from the rescue party in mud caverns, a chamber at the far end of the system. The coroner decided to seal the cave, and concrete was poured down the only safe entrance. However, this was later reopened in 1971. This is to date the most deadly incident in British caving. A plaque is affixed to the cliff above the entrance in memory of those who had tragically passed away in the disaster. A memorial cairn is also raised over the place in the cave where the bodies were found. If you have made it this far, I want to thank you for watching. If you want to support us, leave us a like, share, or comment your thoughts below. And if you enjoy stories related to true crime, unfortunate events, horrors, and mysteries, make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our uploads. Until then, see you next time.